Come from a lower middle class part of Honolulu. And I don't want to paint the picture of total poverty, just overcoming horrendous conditions, because that's not true. I had a very happy lower middle class upbringing. I'm third generation Japanese American. My family came over from Japan because of the lack of economic opportunity. And you could also make the case that my family came over because at that time, males in Japan were conscripted, so you were drafted to go fight in China. So you could make the case that I come from a family of draft dodgers. And the lesson that I learned here is that, my family made a very big decision. They didn't just change job or change, streets or change prefectures. They changed countries. And the wisdom I got from that is, change a losing game. If you're in a game that you cannot win, the odds are stacked against you, then change it. And in their case, they left Japan and moved to Hawaii. Now, it's not like they moved to Hawaii to become investment bankers. They moved to Hawaii to pick sugarcane. So pick sugarcane, first generation, second generation, real estate broker, state senator, my father, third generation, goes to Stanford, Silicon Valley, tech, the whole thing. So I'm the third generation, but the first generation, the generation that moved to Hawaii, is what changed the game. So if there is a single biggest secret in quotes, to my success, and I think to many people's success, it is grit. It is the willingness, if not the total enjoyment of working hard. So I've never considered myself particularly smarter than anybody, more technical, more visionary, anything like that. What I can do is outwork people, and I enjoy the work. It's not only true in my sort of day job of chief evangelist of Canva or working for Apple or when I started companies. It's true of my writing. I think that the most enjoyable part of writing for me is when I have the rough draft and then I spend months and months and months perfecting and editing the rough draft. That's the most enjoyable part of the process for me. And that is hardly a common attitude among authors. Most authors hate the editing process. I love the editing process. When I'm about to finish a book, I put it out there and I let literally hundreds of people read the draft, and dozens of people submit the Word document back to me with comments in it. And I go through each and every comment and look what people said and make corrections. There's two lessons with me in sports. So I took up hockey at 48 and I took up surfing at 62. Both are not exactly the ideal time to take up hockey or surfing. And for me, it's a very good insight into my personality and grit. It's not like I was a natural and I just got up on a surfboard or I stepped on the ice and started scoring. It was definitely very difficult for me. Surfing is maybe the hardest thing I've ever tried to learn. And this means that, if you start that late and you're not a natural, you have to outwork people. So I surf more. I do, dry land exercises. When I was playing hockey, I did a lot of work in the backyard, practicing wrist shots and all this kind of stuff. That's the trajectory of my life. I'm a gritty person. If you look at my career trajectory, my life trajectory, there were a few instances where it fundamentally changed. I went to a school called Kalihi Elementary. And if you're from Hawaii, you would know that Kalihi Elementary is not exactly in the best part of town. But anyway, so a sixth grade teacher pulled my parents aside and said, "Get Guy out of the public school system. He has too much potential." And put him in a private school system, college prep, the whole thing. And if she had not had that conversation with my parents, and if my parents had not listened to her, I would have a very different life. I don't know where I would be. Probably in Hawaii, maybe retired, but certainly I would not have had the exposure. I would not have had probably the financial success either. And it was because this one teacher took it upon herself to convince my parents to change my educational path. And there's a lot of lessons there. So one is that education does make a difference. The second is that if you are a teacher or a coach, and you read about Steve Jobs changing the world and Elon Musk changing the world, and all these people who are, quote, denting the universe. And you think, oh, in order to truly dent the universe, I have to be a Steve Jobs. I have to be an Elon Musk. I have to be a Richard Branson. It's not true that basically you could dent the universe by helping one person make a decision like that. I don't think people should feel the pressure to be the next Steve Jobs. I think they should just help as many people as they can. And that could be one. A teacher, a coach, or mentor, you should be proud of what you do. That's another lesson, another piece of wisdom from my past. My path, had I stayed in Hawaii, would have been, public elementary school, public intermediate school, public high school, probably University of Hawaii. I would have remained in Hawaii. I would have gone into maybe politics, maybe tourism, agriculture, retailing. Those are the paths in Hawaii. So this sixth grade teacher took me out of that, put me into the private school system. I went to Iolani School. That's the school that Barack Obama could not get into. And from there, Iolani, and I have very vague recollections of why this happened, but somehow somebody at Iolani convinced me to apply to Stanford. And I know I would not get into Stanford today, but somehow I got in. Maybe it was so long ago that back then Japanese Americans were considered an oppressed minority. So I got into Stanford. At Stanford, among many other things, I met Mike Boych, who became my roommate and best friend. And he eventually got me into Apple via basically nepotism. And so, no sixth grade teacher, no Iolani, no Stanford, no Mike Boych, no Apple, and the rest is history. So there's a lot of lessons there about, again, this teacher making this impact, about the serendipity of things, about nepotism, because, I really, on paper, I wasn't qualified to work at Apple. But there's a wisdom there too, which is it doesn't matter how you get in. I got in with nepotism. I didn't succeed because of nepotism. I got in because of nepotism. And the lesson there is it doesn't matter how you get in. What matters is what you do once you are in. So that's the arc of my life. Whenever you're young and looking back, you always think that, oh, it was so tough for me. And I thought it was tough. You probably thought it was tough. And Max probably thinking it was tough. She had to have a 4.2 and she had to have 2,400 on the SATs and all that. Probably you did, right? No. and I would say that, it's all going to sort of come out in the wash. And I have two kids who have graduated from college, and they were on this track of private school here in Northern California, concerned about SATs, concerned about GPA, get in the right college. God forbid you don't get into the right college, your life is ruined. And that isn't exactly how it works. And I've asked both sons who are now in the workforce, has anybody ever asked you what your college GPA was in the recruitment process? And never. It doesn't matter. So it could be that it truly doesn't matter. It could be that the proxies of, they went to UCLA and Cal, so that's all people need to know. But my conclusion is, it all comes out in the wash. And if you had this, let's take an extreme, you had a PhD in computer science from Stanford, so on paper, you are just perfect, right? But if you're incompetent or you're lazy or you're dishonest, you're not going to succeed. On the other hand, you may have, an AA from community college and you learn programming on the side. But if you're a great programmer, you're a great programmer. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your degree once you get into the workforce. I had a favorite uncle. This uncle would take me to the zoo, take me to drive-in movies, all the good stuff, right? And one day we go to this store because he needed some screws. And to my utter amazement, he opened up the box of screws and took some screws, and we walked out. And so this is my favorite uncle, who I now know is a shoplifter, and I'm an accomplice to this crime. And to this day, I think about that because this is a case where this is a really good uncle. I mean, it's not like he was a pathological criminal and liar. He was a great guy, and yet he did this one thing, and that taught me something. Taught me that he's a good guy, but he did something wrong. And I also have seen the flip side where people who I thought were fundamentally bad would do good things. And so that's the concept of integration, where you can hold in your mind the fact that life and people are not black and white, that bad people can do good things and good people can do bad things. It's not, it's more shades of gray than black and white. So, with hindsight, I think there are a few stages of life. And when you're young, a kid, you think that your parents are absolutely right, omniscient, omnipotent. Then you get into your teenage years and you start resisting and you think that they're wrong. And then a few more years go by and you think, um, maybe they were right a few times. And then you wait a few more years, now you're, 50 or 60, you say, I have become my parents. My parents told me to do this, and this is how the world worked. And I said, no, you're dad, mom, you're absolutely wrong. You have no clue how the world really works. And by the time you're 50 or 60, you say, wow, I'm saying the same thing to my kids that my parents said to me and I didn't believe. And the final stage of life is not only have you become your parents, now you truly regret that you never thanked your parents for helping you along. You realize they were right, but they're gone, and you cannot tell them they're right. So that's the stages in life that I figured out. Now, when your kid goes to a school, you've probably visited the school at least once, maybe twice. Spring of junior year of high school, then you apply, and then you hopefully get into multiple schools. So you do one more round to just make sure which school are you going to go to. Well, that's not how it worked when I was in school. So I applied. I got into the University of Hawaii, Stanford, and Occidental. And I wanted to go to Occidental because at Occidental, because it's, I don't know, D3 or D4 or whatever it is, I could have played football, and I loved football in high school. And so I have this University of Hawaii, which is 10 miles from my house and free. Stanford, which is, I don't know, 3,000 miles away. Occidental, which is 3,000 miles away. And I tell my parents I want to go to Occidental to play football. And my father says, you know what? If we're paying all this money, i.e. not the University of Hawaii for free, if we're paying all this money, you're going to go to Stanford, not Occidental. And I had no choice. He said, it's either Stanford or University of Hawaii. That's it. Those are the two choices. So not being stupid, not that stupid anyway, I picked Stanford. And lucky me. I mean, I guess if I went to Occidental, maybe I could have been president of the United States. But I went to Stanford. I met Mike Boych, got me into the Macintosh division, and the rest is history. There's several points here. One is, maybe your parents do know what's good for you. Because my father definitely said, Hawaii or Stanford. There was no other choice. That's number one. Number two, a lot of the value of education is not just what you learn in the classroom, but it's the people you meet. Meeting Mike Boych was instrumental in my career, and I met him at Stanford. That's the second point. Third point is, if I had remained in Hawaii, I think my horizons would have been very different. In Hawaii, I think my career aspiration would have been manage a hotel, manage a store. I don't know what, work on a plantation. I don't know what. But when I got to California from Hawaii, man, it was like the clouds parted, angels started to sing. It was, German and Italian cars. It was really beautiful girls at Stanford. And I said, I was made to live in California. And in California, your expectation was not, oh, I'll I'll be in the tourism business or I'll be in the retail business or whatever. These people were creating businesses. So this is the land of Hewlett and Packard and Intel and National Semiconductor. And, these people were creating entire new industries, not simply working in an existing industry. So, man, when I got off that plane at SFO, got in a van, came to Stanford for the first time. I had no idea. I'd never been to Stanford before. It was all new to me. It was, man, it was a earth-shattering experience. It was the best. It's difficult to truly know what level of entrepreneurship there really was. This is 1972. The Valley arguably started in 1933, so it was 40 years into it. 72, Apple had not started yet. Apple started in 76. There were new industries. It wasn't simply sugarcane and pineapples and hotel rooms anymore. There were new industries. And that was unique. You're asked about your motivations and your path, and you say, yeah, I always wanted to dent the universe. I always wanted to change the world. I wanted to make the world a better place. I wanted to create, this great new computer, et cetera, et cetera. Well, let me tell you something. So when I was in Hawaii in my high school years, somebody once gave me a ride in a 911. And that sort of opened my eyes to German cars. And then I get to Stanford. Mike Boych's roommate takes me home one Thanksgiving or something. And you have to understand the context. So I come from a lower middle class part of Hawaii. I go home with my college roommate. His house is an estate on the Arizona Biltmore golf course. So his backyard is the Arizona Biltmore golf course. His father drives a Rolls Royce. His mother, we go to dinner one night. She asked me to drive her home in her Ferrari Daytona. Coming from Kalihi Valley, let me tell you something. This is like a whole new experience. And so I'm telling you this whole story because, people worry about what motivates them, the desire to change the world, dent the universe. I'm telling you with total certainty, insipid and shallow as this may sound, I wasn't concerned about changing the world. I just wanted to change the car. And I was determined that I was going to have a great car. And believe it or not, that drove me to study, that drove me to work hard, that drove me to a lot of things. But the lesson here is you don't worry about what motivates you. Just worry that you are motivated. I think all of marketing and maybe all of entrepreneurship can be boiled down to a simple 2x2 matrix. And in this 2x2 matrix, the vertical axis is your degree of differentiation. So the higher you are, the more different you are from everything. The other axis is value. So near the 0 point, you have no value. Out towards here, you have a very valuable thing. So the bottom line for entrepreneurship is that you want something that's unique and valuable. If you're unique but not valuable, then you're just stupid. You've created a market, trying to tap a market that doesn't exist. And if you're valuable but not unique, you always have to compete on price. And if you're not unique and you're not valuable, well, you are a total loser. But anyway, so the corner you want to be in of this 2x2 matrix is where you have something different and it's valuable. Some examples. When the iPod first came out, it was unique and valuable. It was the only way that you could get music from major publishers legally, inexpensively, and easily. Unique and valuable. And so that's where history is made. That's where marketing, really kicks in. So if you're the maker, if you're an engineer, you have to create something that's unique and valuable. And if you're the marketeer, you have to convince the world that what you have is unique and valuable. But that's where the action is. And iPod was there, Macintosh was there. Now, this is not to say that you can't make money in any of the other corners. In particular, you could have something that's valuable but not unique, making a Windows clone, right? Same operating system, same hardware. You can make money there, but it'll always be about price because you have the same thing. So the real action is in the unique and valuable corner. back in the 90s, 1990s, not 1890s, back in the 90s, I lived in San Francisco on Union Street in Cow Hollow. So Cow Hollow is where Union Street dead ends into the Presidio. So to put it mildly, it is a nice place. And one day I'm outside cutting the hedge, and this older white woman comes up to me and says, "Do you do lawns?" And I sit there, so because I'm Japanese, you think I'm the yard man, right? She goes, "No, no, it's because you're doing such a great job. I want to know if you do lawns." So that's a good story right there. There's some wisdom there about racial profiling. You see a Japanese guy cutting the lawn or cutting the hedge in front of a house, don't assume he's the yard man. But wait, it gets better. So a few weeks later, my father comes and visits me. I'm third generation Japanese American. He's second, served in the U.S. Army, the whole shooting match, right? And I fully expect him to go off when I tell him this story that, how dare this woman think that you're the yard man? You went to Stanford, you work for Apple, you've written, I don't know, maybe 5 books at that point. And instead, he says to me, son, Japanese man cutting a hedge in front of a house in Cow Hollow. Statistically, you probably were the yard man. So get over it. And basically, he was telling me to, take the high road. Don't look for a problem where it doesn't exist. Don't take it personally. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Don't look for trouble where it doesn't exist. And that was a pivotal moment in my life. And from that moment, it took a lot more to insult me. And that's a story that I think everybody should benefit from, even if it was racial profiling and stereotyping. That doesn't mean that it should make you go off the rails. It's kind of related to a concept that I love from a Stanford professor named Carol Dweck. And this is the expert in mindsets. So there's the growth mindset and there's the non-growth mindset. And the growth mindset is that you can always change, you can improve, and that, there's 2 ways. So when you can't figure something out, the growth mindset is, yes, you can, be gritty and all that. The other thing is, if you are a natural, if you're so good in math or you're so good in the violin, one of the dangers of the success mindset is that, everybody says you're so great at violin, you're so great in math, that your self-image is tied into success. And so if you're great in the violin, you don't take up surfing because you probably will suck at surfing. And then what? People will not think that you're this total winner. And you may face challenges and, it may affect your psyche. And I think Carol Dweck's point is, the people who are truly successful are the people who work hard, not the people who are naturals. Because naturals tend to stay where they are comfortable and where they are, naturally good. But the growth mindset is, you may be great in violin, you should take up surfing too. Absolutely, there could be another Google. And listen, a few years ago, we thought that MySpace would be the operating system of the internet, right? So MySpace would dominate everything. And there'd be this little corner called Amazon. And there'd be this little corner called Microsoft where you got, your office applications. And there'd be this little corner called Apple where you bought your computers. But MySpace would be the big picture. Didn't quite work out that way. And now we're probably saying that, Facebook is the operating system of the internet. But who knows? And this is just a few years. So the next Google and Facebook and Apple, it's somewhere with 2 guys in a garage, 2 gals in a garage, and a guy and a gal in a garage. Just as when we're in the middle of MySpace, we never foresaw Facebook. Right now we're in the middle of Facebook, and we're not foreseeing the next big thing. And there is no way to predict the next big thing. And as I look back, nobody predicted Facebook. Nobody predicted Twitter. We can say we did. We can say we knew it, but we didn't know it. If you ask the founders of Facebook and you ask the founders of Twitter, basically if you ask the founders of every great unicorn, how many times were you rejected? they would say we're rejected 20, 30, 40, 50 times, right? And now this doesn't mean that just because you're rejected, it means you're going to build a unicorn. I wish it was that simple. You would look for rejection. But it does mean that just because you are rejected, it does not mean that you are a failure. I think with hindsight, a lot of people, what they do is they take what's quote known and they accept it, and they absolutely do not accept what's unknown. And I think that is opposite of what you should do. You should embrace what is unknown, the change, the innovation, and you should reject what everybody knows. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm telling you that you should believe that the earth is flat. I'm telling you that when everybody says something is true, to use a simple example, if everybody says, well, this is the way to do social media, or this is the way to foster innovation, you should challenge what the so-called experts say. And I include myself in that. And listen, you watch all these things and you read my book and all that, and I'm so-called an expert. I'm not telling you to accept everything I say as gospel. You should challenge what I'm saying. And that would be a healthier attitude. And I think that's especially healthy now because nobody really knows, especially in social media, what is truth anymore. It seems to me that much of what's called the truth in social media is whatever you already believe. And what is not truth, what is fake, is what you disagree with. And that is a very stupid way to approach life. And so what you should do is do the opposite. That, if somebody tells you that vaccination causes autism, you should question that. Now, you could also make the case that if somebody says vaccination doesn't cause autism, you should question that. I guess I'm saying that today, because of social media, you should just be skeptical. And, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Check sources. The question is, well, what is a source? And I would say you look at places like NPR. They don't have a political agenda. You look at Wikipedia, because on Wikipedia, there's a natural conflict between both sides of the story. And I was on the board of trustees of Wikipedia. And to this day, it irritates me that teachers say you can't source Wikipedia because Wikipedia, anybody can change anything. And while that is true at some level, that Wikipedia is a very, even playing field, that you can go on and you can change something, you can add something to Wikipedia. You can't go on to Wikipedia and say that the earth is flat, and all of a sudden everybody's quoting that and saying, oh, the earth is flat. I read it on Wikipedia. You can't go and say, well, the sun revolves around the earth, and now everybody's saying, oh, yeah, that's how it works. Those kind of things would be smacked down in minutes. And so I think Wikipedia is a great source. But the point is to be skeptical. I don't know how we got on skepticism from that entry point, but it is about, whatever you assume is true, you should be skeptical. And whatever you think is not true, you should also be skeptical. You should just be skeptical today. And I tell you this right now, as we're taping this, Facebook is facing this potential of $3 to $5 billion fines in privacy and all that. And the question is, what do you believe on social media and all that? And this is a good time to tell you that, the concept, if you believe, and if these idiot politicians who don't even use computers also believe that, they're going to tell Mark Zuckerberg, you have to make it so there's no fake news on Facebook and Twitter. That's such a clueless attitude. I mean, there's no way, there's no algorithm, there's no group of 10,000 people looking at every tweet, every Facebook post that's going to catch all fake stories. The attitude has to be that everybody needs to be skeptical. In fact, we could really go down a rat hole now, but I could make the case that if you believe that Facebook has cleansed all the misinformation from Facebook because of some magic algorithm or because of a room with 10,000 human editors, that's probably the worst outcome of all, because now you're not skeptical and you think that it's been solved and you really will believe what you see. And that's the most dangerous position of all. The key to getting a job is to get a job any way you can. In my case, for Apple, it was nepotism. It was my college classmate got me into Apple. I had a psych degree. I was working fundamentally in the jewelry business. On paper, I had no reason that I should have gotten that job. It was because of nepotism. Having said that, nepotism got me in, but grittiness and passion for Macintosh made me succeed. And that's a very valuable lesson. It doesn't matter how you get in, it matters what you do once you are in. And so many people would take that as that's a very positive message. I don't have to have the right background. I have to be the perfect candidate to succeed. That's partially what I'm saying. I'm also saying that if you are the perfect candidate, PhD in computer science from MIT, 5 years of experience in the computer business or the software business or the internet business, just because you have the perfect work experience and educational background, it also doesn't mean you'll succeed. Because you may just not get it. You may not understand. You may not feel passionately about the company you're working for. So if you're watching this and you're in charge of hiring people, I'm telling you that not only look at background, education, background, work experience, also look for passion. Do these people get it? Do they see that we're trying to do ride sharing? Do they see that we're trying to democratize design? Or is it just that on paper they have the right degree and the right work experience? The flip side is this person has no degree in computer science. I have a degree in psych because it was the easiest major I could find at Stanford. On paper, there's no way I should have succeeded. I found the easiest major and I was in the jewelry business. So that's a very valuable lesson. So that's about how you get in. The next issue is where you get in. So, you could make the case that the rising tide floats all boats. So, if you went to work for a strange company 15, 20 years ago that they were like, they were looking at how many inbound links were to each article, and then that's how they would display search results. You can't even explain that to your mother or father, right? Like, what's a link? What's an inbound link? What's search? What's the internet? My God, why don't you go to work for Bank of America? Or why don't you go to work for Wells Fargo or Lehman Brothers or, Sears, companies that will be around forever and you have job security. But you go to work for Google. And you go to work for Google and let's take the worst case. I mean, you are in charge of, I don't want to say that's the worst case. Let's take a case where you're, the receptionist at the first Google office, right? So you're buzzing the door to let people in and you're employee number 6 and they give you 10,000 shares and now, you're worth $200 million and you've gone from receptionist to tester to product manager to VP of search. That's a great story. So what you have to do is you have to say, well, it's not important that I get the first position with this ideal title so that on my LinkedIn profile, it doesn't look like I'm a loser. Just get in at any position and make the tide rise. That's the key. I was involved with these lawsuits between Apple and Digital Research, Apple and Microsoft about the graphical user interface. So my best story about negotiation is this. So Digital Research created something called GEM. And this was, in our humble opinion, a ripoff of the Macintosh user interface. So we have our outside counsel, and we're going to go to Digital Research in Monterey and meet with them. So this is a guy named Jack Brown, and I was in the car that Jack Brown was in as we're driving to Digital Research in Monterey. And as we're driving along, he says to me, Guy, a trash can is a trash can. An icon is an icon. There's other systems with menus and WYSIWYG and icons. So I don't know what's going to happen today. I don't know how we can win. It's not like we invented this and we patented it and all that, And I'm getting out of that car saying, man, why are we even here? We don't have a legal foot to stand on. We go into this conference room. Jack Brown, me, more lawyers, their executives. And he stands up and he goes into this diatribe and he says something to the effect of, in my entire legal career, I've never seen a more heinous intellectual ripoff of a company's proprietary knowledge and expertise and design. This is one of the worst instances of criminality and illegality I have ever seen. I don't know why we're even here. We should just sue you right now and not even talk to you. And I'm having this out-of-body experience. Like, this is the same guy who told me we had nothing to stand on, driving down for 2 hours to Monterey. We get to Monterey, and he's pushing them like they're war criminals. Like, there's never been a worse crime in the history of mankind. And I learned a lot about negotiation that day, which is what we do very well in Silicon Valley. Just fake it till you make it. And so there's a lot to learn here. So one thing is, you know what? Be bold. I mean, he was bold. I mean, he established a little line in the sand, and that line was for Apple. It wasn't for them. So he was very bold. And if you're very bold, then when you back off, you're still in a position you like. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two would be on the opposite side. So when you go into a meeting and somebody just rips you and is like seemingly from a position of strength and all that, and they know exactly what they're doing and all that, don't believe them. They're probably full of doubt. They probably don't know what they're doing either. They're just bluffing. So I'm telling you, there's the art of the bluff and the art of resisting being bluffed. And so now, when I am being bluffed, it has much less effect on me. Part of this is the concept of anchoring, which people have to understand this concept. So, a lot of times as a professional speaker, people say, well, this is a very strategic meeting for you. Lots of important people. It'll be very good for your career and your company. So we don't offer any fees. And so I can't tell you that may be the truth, but I am also telling you they're trying to anchor you. So they're trying to say we pay no fees. We might pay business class. And so they're anchoring you at zero. So how can you come back when they offer you zero and say, well, my fees are, it's not true in my case, I'm just picking a hypothetical number, but how can you come back and say, well, my fees are 100,000 because this person just offered you zero and now you're going to counter at 100,000? Just socially, people think, did you just hear me? I'm saying we don't offer anything and you're coming back with like 6 digits. The opposite also works. So you're the speaker and you're going to make the first offer. So you tell them, well, my usual fee is $100,000. Because then it takes someone with real courage to say, well, we're offering you $5,000. Because you anchored them at $100,000. Most people would blink and say, okay, so all we can offer you is $75,000. Very few people will come back and say, we offer you $5,000, because that is just too much of a disparity. So I tell you this because you may be on either side of this. Someone may lowball you. Just ignore that and tell them your number. Someone may also highball you. Doesn't matter. Come back with your low number. I can't tell you it's always going to work, but don't let yourself be anchored. On the other hand, if you are the person putting out the first number, try to anchor the other person. I do it all the time. I don't, but you have to be willing to walk. That's one of the lessons too. Now, this is a wisdom in telling the truth. So one day, I'm working at my cubicle. Steve Jobs shows up with someone I'd never met in my life. And Steve says to me, what do you think of this company called Noware? Knoware. It was a software company, educational software company, knowledge software, chunk rated to Noware. I said, well, Steve, it's kind of a mediocre company, mediocre product. It doesn't really take advantage of the Macintosh graphics and WYSIWYG and all the cool stuff. It's 2 + 2 = 4, not strategic for us. And he says to me, Guy, I wanted to introduce you to the CEO of Noware. So right after I ripped his company and his product, Steve introduces me to the CEO of the company because he had not told me this was the CEO of the company. If I had known that that was the CEO of the company, I might not have been as harsh. So what's the lesson? Well, the lesson is tell the truth because, well, several reasons. One is with Steve Jobs, he had to pass the Steve Jobs test every day. And so Steve Jobs, probably, I can't tell you this is how it actually happened, but probably Steve had used that company's software and knew it was crap. So I can just imagine a meeting before coming to me that Steve and this guy had met, and Steve says to him, your software is crap. And he says, no, it's not. We're selling 10,000 copies, 100,000 copies a month. Our software is great. And Steve would say, okay, let's go see Guy, my software evangelist. Let's see what he says. He comes in there and I say it's crap. And I passed the Steve Jobs test because if I had said it was great, I might have been fired on the spot. So the lesson is tell the truth. Tell the truth. And it, because there is one truth usually. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it, I think, that I've learned through my life is, because there's usually one truth, life is a lot easier and simpler because if you tell the truth, you only have to remember the truth. You don't have to remember, well, I told Congress one story. I told, CNN another story. I told my wife another story. I told the Senate as opposed to the House. I told the Supreme Court another story. I told Breitbart another story. And I told Fox another story. So now you have to keep it in your mind. What did I tell the House versus the Senate versus the Supreme Court versus CNN versus my staff? If you just tell them the truth, you don't have to remember one story. It's a much easier way to go. Towards the end of my second stint at Apple, we're in this meeting with Steve Jobs, all the marketing people, and someone from an outside ad agency that created the Think Different commercials. This is the Albert Einstein, Gandhi, commercials that really were a turning point for Apple. And so this agency guy, very famous, creative, shows up, shows the Think Different campaign, and we loved it. And he says at the end of the meeting, I have 2 copies of what I just showed you. So I'll give you one, Steve, and I'll give one to Guy. And Steve says, don't give one to Guy. Now, you understand, this is in front of 20 people. So I say to Steve, why, Steve? Don't you trust me? And Steve Jobs, being the honest guy that he is, says, yes, Guy, I do not trust you. And then I said, well, Steve, it's okay because I don't trust you either. And so how should we look at that story? Well, it's a funny story. I truly became a man that day when I stared down Steve Jobs. Probably that cost me $200 million, but that was worth it. And it's just a funny story about telling the truth, and sometimes you just have to stand up and let it just all hang out. My first position at Apple was software evangelist. I worked for Mike Boych, And our job was to go around the world convincing people to write software and create hardware peripherals for a computer that basically didn't exist. So it was not yet shipping. The documentation was sort of draft, and this is back when documentation was actually printed. It was on this really thin, sort of yellow pages like material. God, people won't even know what yellow pages are anymore. But anyway, it's just thin paper, okay? And so that was my job. And evangelism comes from Greek word meaning bringing the good news. So we brought the good news of Macintosh, that Macintosh would make you more creative and productive. And so that was my first stint as an evangelist. Second stint, I left Apple. I returned as chief evangelist of Apple. And this time was to preserve the Macintosh cult, the Macintosh community. And again, it was still bringing the good news. And what I've learned about evangelism is that whereas most people think of the world in terms of sales, that it's about my quota, my commission, my income. Evangelism is different. Evangelism takes into account another factor, which is your benefit. So when I evangelize Canva to you, don't get me wrong, it's good for me that you use Canva, but I want you to use Canva or Macintosh because they will make you more creative and productive, a better communicator, capable of making great graphics. So it's also your best interest that I have at heart. And that's the difference between sales and evangelism. People often ask me, so what's the key to evangelism? And I think they're searching for an answer like, well, you have to be a natural salesperson, you have to be outgoing, you have to be Jerry Maguire and this kind of thing. But I'll tell you that the truth is that the key to evangelism is called Guy's Golden Touch. And Guy's Golden Touch is not that whatever I touch turns to gold. Guy's Golden Touch is whatever is gold, the guy touches. And so what I'm trying to communicate to you is that the key to evangelism is evangelizing great stuff, because it is easy to evangelize great stuff. It's very hard to evangelize crap. I've been chief evangelist twice in my career, for Macintosh and for Canva. And the reason why I was successful with Macintosh and I am successful with Canva is not because of my inherent ability or anything like that. To a large degree, right place, right time for me. The reason why I'm successful with Canva and Macintosh is because Canva and Macintosh are great, great products. They are high and to the right. They are unique and valuable. And so the wisdom there is, you want to be a great evangelist, find or create something that's great. That's 90% of the battle. The process of making a product great, a lot of it is, first of all, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not market driven. So I think great innovation occurs when two guys in a garage, two gals in a garage, a guy and a gal in a garage, they create the product that they want to use, as opposed to some market research study. So Steve and Woz want to create a personal computer. There was no market research validating the size of the personal computer market. They created what they wanted to use. And so the lesson there is that, contrary to maybe all the marketing lessons you've learned about, you look at the market, you talk to your customers, you ask them what they want you to create, and you go and you execute. I think that's wrong. I think you listen to your existing customers to evolve your product or service. But you can't ask your customers how to jump to the next curve, how to truly be revolutionary and innovative, because they can only define what you provide to them in terms of what they already get from you. So if you're buying Apple IIs from Apple, and Apple says, what would you like in the future? You're going to say better, faster, cheaper Apple II. You're not going to say Macintosh. If you're buying Macintoshes, you're not going to say I want iOS, because it's not in your mental framework to ask a computer company for a phone or an MP3 player. And so I think that great innovation occurs because two people in a garage, they create what they want to use, and then they get lucky. It's better to be lucky than smart. Another piece of wisdom. It is better to be lucky than smart. In 1975, an engineer at Kodak invented digital photography. He created the first digital camera, 1975. So how many of us today use a Kodak digital camera? Zero. And why is that? Well, you could make the case that of all companies, Kodak should have appreciated a digital camera because they were already in the film business. And what does film do? Film enables you to preserve the Kodak moment. But a digital camera is so much better at preserving the Kodak moment than chemicals on film. But the problem is that Kodak defined their business as we're in the chemicals business and we put chemicals on film. People expose the film to light. We expose the exposed film to chemicals. And guess what? Out pops a slide, out pops a negative, out pops a print. But what Kodak should have figured out is they're in the preservation of moments business. And whether you preserve a moment with film or paper, i.e. Polaroid instant camera, or a digital sensor, doesn't matter. And that's a very valuable lesson about defining your business. If Kodak had said to itself, well, we're in the business of defining moments, which the irony is, of course, that their agency or their marketing department, they had a promotion, the Kodak moment. But it was the Kodak moment preserved by chemicals. It should have been just the Kodak moment. We would still be using Kodaks today. And the same is true of typewriter companies. There should be a Remington Rand Smith Corona computer. They were in the typewriter business. They fundamentally understood that they were enabling people to communicate, getting words from your brain onto the paper. But they defined themselves as typewriter businesses, not computer businesses, not the information retrieval and dissemination business. And if they had defined their business a different way, they'd still be here. Blockbuster was in the entertainment business, but they defined themselves as we have retail storefronts where people come in and they rent videotapes and they rent DVDs. That kind of wipes out streaming. And so none of us go to a Blockbuster store today. A positive example is Netflix. So Netflix, if you're old enough to remember, believe it or not, you used to get a DVD in a mailer from Netflix. You used to tell Netflix, send me Rocky 1, send me Rocky 2, send me, Mission Impossible. And you'd get a DVD, you'd watch Rocky 1, you'd send it back, you'd get Rocky 2 through the mail. And now Netflix is totally streaming and it's in the content creation business, not just distribution business. And you have to say either Netflix was really smart or they're really lucky. But, the name of Netflix from the start was Netflix as opposed to DVD flicks or mail flicks or physical DVD flicks. They knew net from the start. And so I hope that it was because they foresaw a day of file sharing and streaming. Or maybe they just got lucky. But, as I say, if you're the successor, you can reinvent history. Maybe net was completely different, right? The word net was just put in there by luck. But now they're based on the internet. They can reinvent history. So from day one, we knew it was the net. The way to get in front of it is, of course, the best way is to invent it. Because by definition, if you've invented the sector, if you've invented the category, then you're in front of it, right? So good example, Aldous PageMaker, right? So Aldous PageMaker invented a category called desktop publishing. Had the world's greatest name, PageMaker. Well, let's see, what does PageMaker do? You don't need an MBA to figure out PageMaker makes pages. Duh! What a great name. So the best way is to invent the category. You could also make the case that being a fast second is a good strategy. So depending on how you want to interpret history, you could say that Xerox PARC created the graphical user interface. Apple copied that, then Microsoft copied Apple. So you could say that Apple was the fast second. You could say that Microsoft was the fast third. The way a Macintosh ex-Apple employee would define it as Apple created the graphical user interface. I mean, obviously Park came first, but it was merely a scientific experiment, engineering experiment. So truly, Apple democratized the computer interface, and then Microsoft copied that. So Microsoft was a fast second. So it's kind of semantic whether Microsoft was third or second and Apple was either first or second. But the point is that you don't necessarily have to create the category. You just have to have the good taste to know what to copy. And so you could make the case that, Steve and company went to Park and saw the future, and they took what was good and they created Macintosh. You could make the case that Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer saw Macintosh and decided, well, this is what we need to copy. The point here is that is a viable path. I hate to admit it. In a pure, perfect world, only the innovator would succeed. That is not true. The second and third can succeed too. As I look back on my life, it seems to me that one of the great lessons is that selling is a crucial skill. I first learned to sell in the jewelry business, believe it or not. The jewelry business is a very small business. It's all about trust and salesmanship, one-on-one, hand-to-hand sales. And you might think, well, I'm not in sales. I'm not calling on stores. I'm not trying to close deals. That's not my role. I would suggest that you rethink that, because in life, I think you're either making it or you're selling it. And this could be convincing someone at the United Gate to put you in economy plus, or someone when you checked in to ship your surfboard for free. You are selling. People think it's only when they're applying for a job or they're trying to make a quota. You're selling, and it's an extremely valuable skill. The concept that what I'm creating is so great it'll sell itself is false. Everything has to be sold, whether it's Macintosh, Canva, iPhone, iPod, iPad, sliced bread, everything has to be sold. So my wisdom and my advice to you is learn how to sell, because all of life is sales. Even if you're an engineer, you're going to have to sell a project or sell an algorithm or sell an architecture. You need to learn how to sell. Way back when, I helped a company called iStock Photo. So iStock Photo was in the business of democratizing stock photography. At the time, if you bought a photo, you went to Getty and you paid $300, $400, $500. And iStock Photo was going to change that, and you could pay $20. And it came from not someone who won a Pulitzer Prize in photography, but a prosumer, someone who took a great shot, uploaded it of, I don't know, bears catching salmon, and you wanted a bears catching salmon picture, and you couldn't pay $300 or $400 or $500 from the National Geographic photographer, but somebody with a DSLR caught this great picture, uploaded it, it's $20. And so this company is from Canada. I met the co-founders at a venture capital conference in Banff, and of all things, we got to know each other because of hockey. So I was talking about my love for hockey, and he eventually bought some skates from me, and it was like a whole story about hockey, but that's how we met. And so anyway, they start this company, and I said, this is a great idea. And I started telling people about it, and I would include it in my speeches. I would use photos from their service in my speeches. So I went all over the world telling people about iStock Photo. But we never came to a legal agreement about an option plan as an advisor, because Canadian option law and stock law was so complex. Fast forward, they sell the company for $50 million. And at that point, still with no agreement, I was expecting nothing actually. So they see me and they say, Guy, we just sold the company for $50 million. What would you have made? And I said, well, at the stage that we met as an outside advisor, typically an outside advisor makes a half percentage point. Now, there are several kinds of advisors. There's the Jerry Maguire has a connection. There's Marcus Welby, the coach. So there's various kinds of advisors. And I said, well, I've kind of been all three. I've been Jerry Maguire with the business connections. I've been Marcus Welby with the advice. And I've also been the window dressing where you say Guy Kawasaki is an advisor, and so I said, well, each of those are half a point, and I did all three. So I said, okay, so we'll give you 1.5 points. So they gave me 1.5 points on 50 million bucks after the deal was done with absolutely no paperwork. 750,000 bucks. Like, who knew, right? I mean, how many people would have done that? Our second story of honor, Steve Case. So I was with Steve Case and his team the day Apple blew up his contract. He was creating Apple Link Personal Edition. So Apple Link was an internal email system for Apple employees. AOL was going to be an external email, sharing service. But Apple blew up the contract. So that night, they're all depressed. They just saw their only customer, their major customer, flushed them down the toilet. And I said, you know what? Apple did you a favor, because inside of Apple, you would have been hamstrung. They would have controlled what you could do. Your project would be completely at the whim of someone at Apple, releasing it or not, blowing it up or not, as you've seen. You just got blown up today. So they did you a favor. And so Steve Case says, well, why don't you give us some consulting? Why don't you do some online conferences for us? And I said, okay, let's do it. So I do this for about 6 months. They're paying me a little bit. They promised me some stock. And then things took off for them. They really stopped asking me to do stuff. So I stopped doing stuff. And I think about 2 years go by. I see Steve at a conference. He goes, Guy, are we still paying you? I said, no, but that's okay because I'm not doing anything. Guy, did we ever give you stock options? I said, no, but I didn't really do much after 6 months. He goes, no, that's okay. We said we'd give you stock options. We'll give you stock options. So he gave me several thousand shares of stock options of AOL at the very beginning. And as the proverbial Bible story about loaves of bread and fish, let's just say a few thousand shares of AOL at the beginning, after all the stock splits and the IPO and all that, turned into a lot of money. And it's all because Steve Case was an honorable person. There was no legal agreement. There was nothing there. He did it out of honor. So those are two very good stories about honor. So my theory is it's better to have an oral, flexible agreement with people with honor than a locked and loaded legal agreement with crooks. I'll take that any day. I have a belief passed on to me by my father about the obligations when you are fortunate, when you have succeeded. So the obligation is to not shut the door to other people succeeding, but to leave the door open, maybe even help people through the door. And that's a moral obligation. And I was taught that at a very young age. Now, I can't tell you that I'm, Marcus Welby mentoring everybody. Okay, so don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to paint myself as some, mythical, awesome mentoring, total philanthropic person. But I do believe there's a moral obligation to help others, to pay it back, as opposed to forward, to pay it back. Because the difference between me and someone who's less successful is often just blind dumb luck. It's not like we quote unquote deserve it. There's a karmic scoreboard in the sky, and you should definitely be in the positive part of that karmic scoreboard because you never know.